Welcome back to More Than a Therapy Couch, the podcast where we go beyond the walls of traditional therapy sessions and into the everyday experiences that shape our mental health and emotional health. I'm your host, Tiana, and we're so glad that you're here. In a world that's constantly shifting, the ways that we connect, cope, and care for ourselves, we are evolving too. That's what we're here for, to embrace the idea that healing and growth don't just happen in a therapist's office. They happen in our friendships, our families, our workplaces, and yes, even in our awkward first dates. Today's episode is about how to connect with others and, more importantly, why. We're joined by Samantha Hartofilis, licensed professional counselor at Tree of Life Counseling Center, who brings a compassionate and insightful lens to the topic of attachment styles. From dating to parenting to friendships, our attachment patterns show up everywhere, and today we're digging into it. So grab your emotional support water bottle, find a comfy spot, and join us as we unpack the complexities of the human experience, tackle the myths around attachments, and offer some tangible takeaways for building healthier and more secure connections. So let's be real. Life is hard, messy, beautiful, and complicated, and we're here to explore it all. Let the session begin. So, Sam, let's just get right into it. Okay. Let's start with the basics. What are the four main different attachment styles?
So the four main attachment styles are secure attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and then disorganized attachment. Now, sometimes people will use different kinds of words or labels as it relates to what people are, saying about each of the attachment styles, because sometimes you'll hear secure or you'll hear a combination of anxious, avoidant, so like people use different labels for it, but also there can be the experience of having more than one type of attachment style. And so those are the four different attachment styles. Do you think you could talk us through what each attachment style is? Yeah, absolutely. So secure attachment is more so characterized by a positive view of the self and others, leading to healthy relationships. This is probably one of the more desired attachment styles, as it does promote the healthiness that we all crave and look for in relationships. Anxious attachment involves more preoccupation with relationships, fear of attachment, fear of abandonment. That can kind of get a little bit complicated as somebody navigates that within their relationship. We have avoidant attachment marked by reluctance to rely on other people, tendency to distance themselves emotionally from someone else. So you can see how if somebody who has combination anxious avoidant, that can be very confusing at times, right? Because the anxious is like, no, I want to attach. And then the avoidant is like, I don't want nothing to do with any of this. And then disorganized attachment is more so a generalized term as it relates to a combination of anxious and avoidant behaviors, often stemming from trauma or inconsistent caregiving. But that's not to say that attachment needs only come from trauma. It can come from a multitude of things, which I'm sure we'll get into as well.
A few things that I would love for us to get into. So I think starting at the very, very beginning, how do these different style types typically form in childhood?
Good question. So as I had mentioned, typically forms from inconsistent caregiving or trauma or major life events that have gone on for somebody, right? So we're going to kind of look at one particular theorist who really talked about attachment in the form of how it comes to be in all different ways. So with Erik Erikson, he had a, theory where we hit different developmental stages in our lives, right? And so one of the first ones is trust versus mistrust. So when you're super young, right, and you're trying to understand the world as a whole, basically it's like, hey, can I trust the environment that I'm in? Do I feel safe? Do I have the ability to trust my caregivers? Essentially then leading to the ability to experience more secure attachment, right? Or is it, do I not trust my surroundings? Do I not trust the world? Is it one big scary place where I have to constantly be looking over my shoulder, not really knowing if I'm going to have consistency with being cared for, and that might lead to more avoidant, or that might lead to more disorganized, anxious attachment. So basically what Erik Erikson had conceptualized was you either resolve yourself in this stage or you become stagnant and you become stuck, right? So somebody who isn't able to successfully move from trust versus mistrust stage into the next developmental milestone will typically exhibit more trust needs.
When you're evaluating your type of attachment style, does some people only have one? Can they have all of them? Can they have like a mixture of different ones?
Right. So number one biggest misconception is that people fall into just one attachment type. But the truth is that we're not so rigid like that as people. We rarely are one thing at all, So when people are like, oh, like, what's your attachment style? It's like, that could be for what it is in the moment, but it doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to reshape it or change it or grow within it. While attachment does, more so develop in childhood as a result of the way caregivers treated us, if we find safety and love with somebody else later in life, we can see that there is a possibility to be able to heal whatever attachment wounds or needs had come into play earlier.
So basically, what I'm understanding is how you were treated when you were a child basically sets the foundation of the type of attachment styles that you do have when getting older.
Correct.
So how do those types of attachment styles start to affect our adult relationships, whether they're romantic or otherwise?
So there are 4 different areas that I like to look at as it relates to adult relationships and attachment. And we break it down into 4 different categories, right? So the first one is commitment. Out of all the attachment styles, people with avoidant attachment relationship styles feel the least committed, right? And that's probably not a surprise, because avoidant typically is like, hey, I'm here, but not fully here. Securely attached people feel the most commitment and tend to have honest, equal, open communication, relationship with each other where it's not so mysterious, like what are you thinking and what are you feeling, and constantly having to read body language or emotional scanning. Yep, exactly. People with other type of attachment styles may be too demanding or distant, or they ask too much of their partner, or they expect too much, or they have this preconceived idea of what a relationship looks like based on their attachment style, based on what they learned from their caregivers. Is the world safe? Can I trust everything? Right. And so sometimes it can be a little bit of like that all or nothing type of deal. Sometimes people with avoidant attachment feel uncomfortable with the closeness and they believe that they don't even need it. Right. When in reality, like, that is what makes up a lot of our connection is to be able to have that emotional vulnerability, closeness. And sometimes they even pride themselves like, oh, I don't even need that. Like, okay, but then what is it that you are accomplishing being in the relationship that you are with your partner? And that may come up sometimes between somebody who's avoidant and then somebody who's anxious, or somebody who's avoidant and avoidant. They might not even talk about it at all, and then it's like, well, all right. I mean, at a certain point, I think it is important for there to be closeness and commitment, right? Because kind of stemming off into another tirade, there is what I like to explain to clients, right? There's this relationship triangle per se, and we really try to strive to have all 3 components, right? So it's passion, intimacy, and commitment, right? So kind of like envision it in the form of a triangle: passion, commitment, intimacy. And if a relationship has intimacy and passion but no commitment, it's like, all right, we're missing like a huge foundational component of the relationship. If there's intimacy and commitment but no passion, all right, things kind of get boring. And then maybe for somebody who is avoidant, it's like, oh, that's fine. But then for somebody who's looking for more secure is like, I don't like this, you know? And then if there's commitment with passion but no intimacy, then it might leave somebody questioning, like, what are we doing here? Like what is it that we are gaining, accomplishing in any regard, right? Not every relationship is going to have all 3 all the time, but if the goal is to strive to get to that place so that way we can build towards secure attachment, that's a good way of kind of like looking at it. It's like, hey, are we hitting all the points of the triangle?
I love that. I've never heard of that like foundation. So I think that's definitely something. If you are listening to this, and I mean, you don't necessarily need to be in a relationship. This can be a relationship with a parent. It could be a relationship with a friend. It could be any type of relationship. But I think definitely taking a step back and like reflecting, being like, okay, where am I at? And asking other people like, listen, I value our relationship. How can we both try to make that relationship stronger and be there for each other.
Right.
What's the best way for me to be there for you and vice versa?
Absolutely. Yes. We're going to definitely get into more communication part of it too, because that's huge. So moving on from commitment, right? The second component is jealousy and trust, right? So those with anxious attachment style are most likely to engage in surveillance of their partner, right? And so that emotional scanning that I was looking for, maybe it's even like, I'm thinking about wanting to check their phone. I'm thinking about wanting to go into their messages. I'm thinking like you want to actively try to seek out, so people with anxious attachment are more likely to engage in those kinds of behaviors, right? And again, like are you mad at me? Did I do something wrong? Like the constant asking, anxious attachment style also within that individuals feel worse when they're experiencing jealousy than those who have more secure, right? So it's like they feel bad about it. They don't like it. They feel like this shouldn't be happening. But then at the same time, they can't help it because they're just anxious. Those with avoidant attachment, they don't feel as fearful or sad when they experience jealousy. They're more like, okay, like it's a thing. It's just happening. Both anxious and avoidant people have difficulty trusting others, right? So like trust obviously is a huge foundational piece of a relationship. If you don't have trust, you don't have anything. So if you have two people in the relationship who are just not jumping on the bandwagon of trust, what are we then going to be able to do? So both styles are associated with more irrational beliefs in a relationship when compared to people who have secure attachment. Now with disorganized attachment, those kinds of people not only feel more jealous, but they can be more prone to making their partners jealous on purpose, right? So it's kind of like proving themselves in the relationship. So when I think about that, it's like, okay, where in your life did you learn to not be able to trust? Where in your life did you learn to test your partner in a way? And I hear that so often from clients. It's like, well, I don't want to test my partner, but I kind of want to do. And I'm like,
why would you want to do that?
Right. Well, it's that attachment style that's making you feel a type of way that something with the testing and everything, there's always a motivator behind human behavior. And so then when that happens, it's like, well, I want to know if they're really committed to me. And you know what also works? Communication.
Asking then.
Right. Like, and I'll say that too. I'm like, you ever ask them? And they're like, no.
Why would I do that?
Right, exactly. Like,
they're like,
why on earth would you do that? That's crazy concept. But yeah, that comes up a lot. So then having an anxious or avoidant style makes a person more likely to induce jealousy. Anxious attachment tends to use, more passive aggressive communication or even aggressive communication, while avoidant people, if they're going to communicate, it's passive aggressive. So with jealousy and trust, those two things, if it continues to negatively be this pattern that keeps popping up, most likely the relationship is not going to be successful. Now, moving on from jealousy and trust, we have emotional intimacy, right? So there's 4 prerequisites to being able to have intimacy in a relationship, whether it be platonic friendships, romantic relationships. It's not just exclusive to romantic. So the 4 prerequisites are ability to seek care, ability to give care, ability to feel comfortable with the autonomous self, and ability to negotiate. So all of those abilities are affected by attachment style naturally. So securely attached people are more connected to their romantic partner, more engagement in the relationship, more communication, more joint friendships, right? So it's not just like, we are our only friends. We don't hang out with anybody else, right? It's like we bring our village into play. We, connect and we network in that regard. More authentic in the way that they express themselves in the relationship, right? So clearly there is value in striving for secure attachment, but that's not to say that with secure attachment, those individuals don't have challenges too at times. I want to, make that clear is that it's not like, oh, if you're securely attached, like you have no problems in your relationships.
You're the perfect, yep.
Right. And like you're perfect and you got it. It's like, no, they also have challenges too. It's just the way that they work through those challenges that's different.
That's something that we've talked about on one of our last episodes is you are going to have conflict with your relationships. That's bound to happen. We all have our own opinions. We all have our own thoughts. But like you said, is how you work through those. Are you able to self-regulate and say, hey, let's have a conversation. And then if you feel yourself get heated, because again, we're human, that's normal.
Yes.
Let me take 15 minutes or let me take a 10-minute break. Let me go on a walk and then let's revisit this conversation.
Absolutely. Right. I couldn't agree more. And so then moving on from emotional intimacy into sexual enjoyment, that is the 4th component in which we're going to get into. So those with secure attachment styles are going to have greater sexual intimacy as well as more communication about sex and an overall higher rate of satisfaction within that regard, right? So no surprise, secure attachment, definitely very well-rounded in that regard. regard. Disorganized attached people are more likely to have anxiety or inhibitions about communication about sex. So they'll avoid it or they'll dance around it, and then sometimes it's like, well, what are they thinking? Like, again, like very common to, constantly question like, well, what are they thinking? Because the communication is just not super common as it relates to really any component in which we're talking about. So just to kind of look at a couple of different statistics, in men, having both anxious and avoidant attachment styles are associated with a higher change of experiencing sexual compulsivity. So there can be ebb and flow to it, or it might be a little bit more, prominent or present. But you can see how with having that attachment style, it definitely adds a different layer to, intimacy in that regard. But with women, disorganized attachment can be the reason for aggressive behaviors, which allows them to provoke other people to engage with them without having to be vulnerable. So even when I just like say that out loud, like that sounds so insane. It's like people will avoid communication more than they should, and like of course, in this moment, I'll self-disclose, I don't necessarily identify with disorganized attachment, so I don't know what that feels like personally. But when I look at how different it is in terms of what that attachment style shows and with what others show, it's like, okay, can work more towards healthier ways of not even just communicating, but like regulating your emotions or co-regulation with your partner, right? But that requires the contemplation of connecting. And it's like, well, connecting is scary. And it truly is for anybody, but especially for people that have challenges with their attachment needs. Because again, if we go back to good old Eric Erickson, can we trust or is it mistrust across the board?
If you do want to start having those conversations with your partner, it can be scary because you're being vulnerable.
Right.
And people don't like to be vulnerable. People don't like to bring their wall down. So that's, I'm sure, definitely a huge aspect of it too. But again, nothing's going to get better if you guys are just like, okay, well, I'm just going to brush it off, or I'm not going to talk about it. How do you expect to feel closer? How do you expect to not want to fight with your partner if that keeps on happening?
Exactly.
One thing that I'm curious about is if, let's say, someone in a relationship, they recognize what attachment styles they themselves have. If they decide, listen, how we're dealing with conflict is not the best way. I want to have a conversation. I want us to work towards this. Is that something that someone can do by themselves? Or would both parties have to be willing to kind of have that conversation?
That's a great question. The thing is that it depends on like the receptiveness of the two individuals coming together and wanting to work through that. But if, let's say, there's not a lot of receptiveness there, then on an individual level, it's totally cool for you to be like, all right, this is still something that I want to work on for me, because even though romantically, if that's not something your partner is ready for, open to, or receptive to, it's like, you don't then just have to be like, oh, well, I guess then I'm not going to work on it. That's actually how codependency happens.
I'm not going to emotionally regulate. I'm just going to forget.
Right.
Ignore.
Exactly. And like overall, that is incredibly valuable. And I get where maybe some people aren't receptive or ready because, again, it's scary and it's uncharted territory. But at the same time, I try to tell clients this all the time, like, when you work through challenging things, whether it be on your own or with your partner, that's where change really happens. Like, it sucks and it hurts and you're going to experience things that you might not like, but it truly is showing, hey, like, we can hold space for vulnerability, but be able to come out of it on the other side and not just constantly stay surface level because we're trying to avoid conflict or we're not trying to, rock the boat. It's like, nope, sometimes you have to, and that's okay. Again, it's how you navigate, how you work through. But if you don't ever, how are you then expected to be able to have a well-rounded relationship?
100%. And I'm wondering if the other aspect of that too is that past generations haven't been open to like having these conversations. So that has just over time trickled down.
Oh yeah, it can definitely tie into generational trauma for sure. Because again, like when you're young and when you're a baby, when you're an infant and you're in that trust versus mistrust stage, right? If your caregiver never healed their generational trauma, what do you think is going to end up happening? Is that they're going to most likely like pass down whatever it was that they normalized. A lot of the times too, parents don't realize, but they project anxiety onto their kids, right? And it's like, oh my God, like, how could I have done this? And like, how did they end up this way? And, it's like, well, most likely, and not that it was intentional, not that you were trying to do anything harmful or bad, but it's because you never healed that part of you that would have been productive to address. So that way, when it did come time to have a kid and to be a parent, it's like we would have maybe felt a little bit more confident, secure, less anxious. It's tough when parents, or adults rather, are like, well, I just want to have kids because like I'm running out of time. Okay, but how are you as an individual? Do you feel like you're ready to emotionally support and give and create healthy, secure attachment? Or are you going to then be this parent that's incredibly anxious, and then it's like you're going to make your kid anxious, and then they're not going to be able to thrive, and then they're going to feel guilty and obligated to take care of you, and then it's like, oh my goodness, it's a lot,
100%. So I know we talked a little bit about a couple different types of attachment styles, but can someone's attachment style show up differently at work or in friendships compared to romantic relationships?
Yes and no. It really does depend on what triggers the attachment need, right? And so we all have different triggers depending on what that is. But, with being triggered, not everyone is super well aware of how to manage those triggers. And so then, if things show up at work or things show up in friendships compared to romantic relationships, it might present itself as, okay, like this reminds me of a time in which I experienced this similarly, and so I'm cool to work through it, right? But then what if it's not something that reminds you of something from the past verbatim, and then it's like, well, this feels kind of new, but it is kind of the same, and so I don't really know how to be able to navigate or work through this, right? So it's interesting, though, to look at attachment as it relates to all different areas of your life, because either you're going to find that there is like a ton of consistency, or there's, certain situational moments in which maybe there isn't. And then it's like, okay, what's going on there? What's creating such a difference right now? Are you masking? Are you, holding back? Are you trying to not let certain things come to the surface? So it's fascinating to look at all those aspects.
From a client's perspective, if you don't start talking about those things, you're not even going to know like that these things exist. You're not going to know that you do these things because of X, Y, Z. Like you have to reflect. We all like how we all react to certain things is just because of, like you said, past things that have happened.
Exactly.
So I think recognizing that. One thing that I found really nice is if you do feel really anxious, this is something recently I've been doing, but like seeing where in your body you feel that.
Love.
And I didn't even know this either. If you're listening to this and you did not know this, depending on where you feel that anxiety in your body, that actually relates to something, because from my understanding, trauma is stored in the body.
Yes, it is. And honestly, that's probably one of the best things that one could encourage of their clients is, hey, like identify what types of feelings you're experiencing on a physical level before we even dive into the emotional aspect of it, right? Because a big part of trauma processing is even just like being comfortable in the space of acknowledging how you feel on a physical level, because most times people either won't or don't know how to, so I really do value that way of trying to get somebody to start talking and opening up about that kind of stuff.
So what are some common misconceptions people have when they hear the term attachment issues?
So there's a ton of misconceptions when people hear attachment issues, right? And like more so like on that surface level of like hearing the word issues, it's like, whoa, like
what do you mean I have an issue?
Right. Yeah. Like it's taken so negatively. And like I could understand that. So with that, right, like sometimes people will indulge more in the misconceptions than what's necessary because they hear that word issue and it's like, oh, that's a problem. And it's like, no, not necessarily. So the idea that there is something inherently wrong with somebody, right? Again, issues, wrong, problem, what's going on, but attachment styles are learned behavioral patterns that can evolve over time. They are not a reflection of a person's fundamental value or worth, right? So like really try to drill that into somebody's brain, because a lot of the times it's like people are so hard on themselves and it's like, well, there's got to be something wrong. And it's like, well, no, maybe we're using an unfair term that something is wrong, but there's something that we want to be able to work through, understand, build awareness, right? Another misconception is that attachment issues are only relevant in childhood and they don't affect relationships. We're not children forever, so at a certain point, we're going to grow into adults, and attachment patterns learned in childhood can significantly impact a person's relationships, including romantic, friendships, professional, right? So like it doesn't just stop and come to a halt. That'd be kind of silly. People sometimes believe that attachment issues are solely caused by neglect or abuse, and that's not always the case. While trauma can contribute to insecure attachment, other factors like parental responsiveness, consistent parenting, even the presence of other supportive relationships can also influence attachment style. So it's not just neglect or abuse. It comes from a lot of different areas of what somebody could have be a part of their schema or their overall worldview of how they perceive the world. Another misconception is being too attached is a problem. So strong attachment bonds are associated with resilience and emotional well-being, right? So like there is really no such thing as being too attached. While some children may exhibit anxious attachment patterns, this doesn't mean that they are too attached, but rather they have specific needs for reassurance and closeness, right? So like there could be something else going on, not necessarily that it has to relate to attachment challenges. Environmentally, are there things going on where we live in a crazy world? Like, I mean, it's so different growing up now than how I grew up. Like I had anxiety growing up, and like I wasn't even growing up in the time period that we're in now. Yeah, so I can't even imagine. So like we have to take that into consideration as well too. Attachment theory is just about parenting techniques, not always, right? So it provides insights into how early experiences shape a person's relational patterns across the lifespan. It's not just about parenting, but also about understanding how individuals form bonds with other people in all aspects of their lives, right? So it's very expansive. It's not just what you think it is or for what it presents face value.
And I'm sure for the people who are listening, they have definitely heard at least one of these misconceptions. If they have not heard it, I'm sure themselves have thought these things. And I love how you broke that down, because it's not also like a one size fit all, like this is everything that you're doing and this is the box. Everything goes back and forth. I'm sure you could be one type of attachment style, then become another one, then become another one. Like you could change throughout the course of your life, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
So going into my next question, are attachment styles fixed? Are they shifted over time with healing or certain experiences? How does someone, I guess, shift from one attachment style to another?
Right. So as we both kind of come to understand, you can absolutely shift over time with healing. Of course, therapy plays a big role in facilitating the growth of secure attachment by a couple of different ways, right? So it gives clients the ability to help understand the etiology or origin of their attachment challenges. You also learn how to restructure your cognitions or your thoughts, right? So a lot of the times, depending on the attachment needs that are coming into play, is then going to feed into how you think about yourself, how you think about the world, how you think about just things in general, right? And so a lot of what we can use in therapy are those CBT skills where we then let someone know, hey, it's not about changing the way that you feel, but it's changing the way that you think about something or the way that you perceive something. Also, healing components of trauma that are linked to a client's belief system, right? That's huge in therapy. So your belief system, not only is it in linkage with your cognitions, but it makes up a big part of who you are and what you do with your time in the world and how it is that you see the world, kind of like linkage back to core values a little bit. And so then if your core value system or if your belief system is somewhat challenged or, for lack of a better word, broken, because I don't like using that word, but if that is the experience of someone, right, that is going to negatively affect how it would be that you see attachment, not only for yourself, but generally speaking, right? And so for individuals with avoidant attachment, it's like, oh, well, attachment doesn't mean anything or it's not important. And it's like, well, what in your belief system made you come to that conclusion, which really gets interesting, because then you like get into the meat of what was your childhood like, and like, It's funny. I always say, like, a majority of the things in our lives come back to two things: control and childhood.
Yeah.
Pick one.
The two C's.
The two C's. Literally, pick one, both, doesn't matter, but most likely it's like, hey, we really want to take a look at that component.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you mentioned was that by you going to therapy, you can like change the way that you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Could you elaborate more? What do you mean you can change the way that you're thinking?
Yes. So it's funny because that's not the first time I've had that reaction of being like, what? Like, that's crazy. So with changing your thinking, right, it really is just a lot of like reality testing, cognitive reframing, looking at something and taking your original narrative and recognizing what might be a healthier way of looking at this, what might be a more realistic way of looking at this, what might be a less harsh or less critical, less judgmental way of looking at it, right? So again, I'm never telling a client, well, the way that you feel is wrong, and so therefore we have to change that in order to change the way that you think. It's not about the feeling. The feeling can stay, but what is the thought that comes from the feeling? Because then whatever thought comes from the feeling is then going to affect how you behave, how you act, right? So we see how, feeling can stay whatever it is. And that provides a lot of validation for people, right? Because typically it's like, well, I don't want to have to change the way that I feel. And it's like, yeah, great. I don't want that for you either, So like, we're not going to do that, but we are going to take a look at how your cognitions ultimately feed into the way that you behave in relationships, whether it be romantic, whether it be with your parents or with friends or in a professional sense. So that's kind of a brief overlay of how you would change your thinking.
So ultimately what you're saying is that by you going to therapy, you can learn how to change your brain chemistry pretty much.
Yeah. Just based off of the way that you think.
That is so interesting, honestly. Some people I feel like can be so hard on themselves and they don't realize where that inner voice kind of comes from. So what role does therapy play in helping someone move towards secure attachment, even though they may have attachment issues, quote unquote?
Right. So huge and crucial role, right? Therapy provides a safe space to explore past attachment experiences, develop healthy relationship patterns, and learn new coping mechanisms if they do experience triggers, which we all do. Therapy helps individuals not only understand their attachment style and how early experiences influence their relationships, but clients can benefit from fostering self-awareness, promoting emotional regulation, and building self-esteem and confidence. So therapy plays a huge role in helping somebody progress towards an attachment style that they are looking to strengthen or enhance, right? And like typically in the beginning of therapy, I always ask, like, what are your goals? What are you looking to accomplish? And not always is it that right off the bat, like, I have attachment issues and I want to work on that, right? But like if a lot of what they're describing sounds like it could be related to that, then I derive the goals in the way that I had just described. Like, okay, like let's start by maybe working on increasing your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-value, right? Like taking a look at your inner narrative. And with that sometimes even comes like inner child-based goals, which again, we were all children at one point. We still have those children with us because we are them, so it's like sometimes it might be hard for somebody to think about the value of working on something for them. I encourage them to, well, picture yourself as a young child, like picture yourself being the one to, help them and improve them. Right. So it's like a interesting way of, conceptualizing growth and healing. But for some people it's like, oh yeah, like that. Yeah, that sounds like it could be really nice. And then more of the work comes into play with attachment style.
So if someone's listening to this episode and they're like, oh, maybe I have that, attachment, or maybe I have that attachment, are there small everyday things that they can do to build more secure relationships, even if they may identify with an insecure style?
Absolutely. So small everyday things that people can do to build more secure relationships include prioritizing effective and healthy communication skills, right? So like, as I was talking earlier, communication is really, really big. So first and foremost, right, even if it might be hard to, we're not asking for people to be perfect, but to try to make it a priority when communicating, not utilize old behavioral ways of how you would typically engage, right? So like really trying to use your I statements or really trying to be clear, direct. Don't bring things up from the past. Don't try to dig up things to be able to, experience a sense of control or power, right? Because it's not about power. It's about how can we be on the same team, working together towards a similar goal. Another way, one can use a small everyday thing to help themselves can be displaying or leaning towards affection, right? So for somebody who's avoidant or somebody who's anxious, maybe that might come a little bit challenging to them, but I'm not talking like 0 to 100, like go from nothing to then go to everything. It's like try to maybe look at your love languages and see how maybe you can lean into them a little bit more. So for example, if maybe somebody is more in touch with words of affirmation, right? It's not about like going all in and expressing your undying love for someone or admiration for them, but even just like practicing giving compliments or practicing, giving compliments to the self. Because before you can connect with another person, a big thing is, can you connect with yourself?
Yeah.
Right. So that's something that's also valuable to teach in therapy, because a lot of the times people don't know how to do that for themselves.
Yeah. I think that's definitely something, whether you're going to therapy for that or for something else, that's definitely something I feel like that does come up a lot.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, naturally. Something else can be increasing empathy, right? So empathy sometimes is hard for people. Empathy and sympathy are not the same things, right? Sympathy is, I just feel bad for you, right?
Yeah.
I feel so sorry for you. I feel bad for you, right? Empathy is, I could understand how you feel because I'm putting myself in your shoes and seeing it from your perspective. So I'm not just feeling bad for you. I'm taking on a place of trying to look at it from your lens, so not trying to take away from the experience, not trying to overpower the experience, but it's a form of connection, right? So when you're empathetic towards someone, it's like, wow, like, okay, they're not trying to say I understand completely, but like they're here with me and attempting to see it from my perspective. That feels really nice, engaging in active listening skills. So communication is not just about talking, it's about actively listening as well, which some people really struggle with because typically it's like, I want to get my point across. No, I want to get my point across. No, you're not listening. No, you're not listening. And it's like, no, we both have to do that whilst also, of course, communicating, building trust via consistency, vulnerability, and honesty, right? So those I feel like they can be small, effective everyday things, but I feel like that's more of like a bigger concept over time. But with building trust via consistency, vulnerability, and honesty as it relates to the self, before you even do it with another person, right? That can be in the form of a daily routine, right? Maybe growing up, as you came to understand or learn things in the world, you never valued self-care. You never valued having a regimen that you liked, right?
Yeah.
And so when you build that for yourself, you build consistency, you build vulnerability, you build that connection. And then it's like, I want to do that with somebody else. That would feel really nice. Practice being present and engaged, right? So that is another big one as well. And so being present, being engaged, right, can be in a variety of ways. So like going for walks on the boardwalk, especially it's getting nicer outside and we're heading into the summertime pretty soon. So practicing being present not only relates to, how you can do it with another person, but how you do it with yourself. And then once you're comfortable, it's like, ooh, maybe I would want to go on the boardwalk and take a walk with my friend or do it with my mom or, trying to look outside of the scope of romantic relationships and more just like, hey, if I'm practicing this for myself, I want to be able to do that with people who I really value and hold close to me. And one last thing that you can do, you can create shared traditions to provide a sense of routine, familiarity, and connection. So again, that consistency, that vulnerability, honesty, that kind of goes hand in hand with, creating some shared traditions. Because if at a young age, you never really learn the value of that and you're kind of feeling like disorganized, not knowing really what to attach to, it's like, well, what do I do with myself? You know? So a lot of it is not only just healing attachment, but it's also working on creating an identity for the self. So like those two go hand in hand.
And I love that you mentioned that because I think there's so many people now with their identity to themselves. They may say, okay, I identify as a mom. I identify as a business owner. I identify as a therapist. You know, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, whatever the case may be. And then at the end of the day, it's like, okay, yes, you are all of those things. But at the end of the day, if you were not all of those things, what are you and who are you?
Yes, absolutely. You wear many hats and that's great. But when all those hats are off, who are you? Yeah. And a lot of people struggle with that.
Absolutely. But we're going to take one short break. And when we get back, we are going to talk about having self-awareness without shaming yourself. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Confections of a Rockstar Bake Shop and Catering. Are you looking for a sweet treat or custom cake and desserts for your next event? Stop into their Asbury Park location where everything is made from scratch using high-quality ingredients. Custom orders can be placed online at www.confectionsofarockstar.com or by calling 732-455-3510 today.
Okay, welcome back. So a lot of people feel called out or even ashamed when they realize that they have an anxious or avoidant style. How do you help clients hold that awareness with self-compassion?
Great question. So I encourage clients to abstain from self-judgment and assist them in learning how their attachment style is ultimately something out of their control, right? Like they didn't have the ability to choose that or know exactly what it would have looked like. Ultimately something that is out of their control, and they are not to be blamed for the way their attachment style had formed, right? So clients typically are so hard on themselves. And when we start to explore attachment style and how they came to be, one of the first things I hear is, oh my God, I have attachment issues. And I'm just like, well, no, not exactly. So I'll encourage them to reframe the narrative from attachment issues to attachment needs. So when I do that, it helps them to understand on a basic human level, we all have needs, even the individuals who have secure attachment. So the goal is, how are we going to work on getting your needs met? And then they're like, oh, well, when you put it that way. And I'm like, yes.
It's all about how you frame it.
And that's kind of going back to what we were saying is like, how do you change your thinking? That's how you change your thinking. The reframe from, I have a problem, I am a problem, I have issues, to no, I'm a human and I have needs and this is normal.
100%. The attachment styles that you have now, as we've, mentioned, is they come from childhood. So also I love to think of people's lives, like this. Everyone gets handed a deck of cards or you get handed a hand, and what are you going to do with that? Some people have great, they're lucky and they have wealthy families, or they're lucky and they have that emotional love that they got from their parents, where some people, they might have not. But I think to recognize, okay, these are the cards I was dealt with. What are you going to do with that hand now that you recognize that?
Exactly. It's a great way of looking at it.
So how can someone bring up their attachment styles with a partner or friend in a way that invites connection rather than conflict?
Yeah, it could be scary to talk about attachment style as there's fear of judgment or criticism. However, I think when bringing up the topic to someone from a place of self-compassion, which is what we teach in therapy or strive to teach in therapy, that can be the best form of opening up the conversation, right? So some people feel comfortable mentioning the fact that they're in therapy to heal their attachment style, whereas if others are not comfortable mentioning that they're in therapy, a way to initiate the conversation can look like, I'm on a journey to learning more about myself in the form of self-acceptance with my attachment style. Is this something I can share more about with you, right? And it doesn't have to be like verbatim that exactly, but along the lines of like, hey, this is me opening up about something. This is me attempting vulnerability. Can I share that with you? If that's not something that we're there for or ready for yet, that's okay. It's not to say that, oh, you were rejected and so that never talk about it again, right? It depends on where people are at and how receptive people are to holding space for those kinds of conversations.
And I loved how you framed that, is asking them, is that something I can share more with you about? Because the other thing is too, you're not going to sit down with your friend and then word vomit everything. And then they're just like, okay. And then it's like, okay, well now I feel insecure because I was so vulnerable with you. And that's all you have to say.
Correct. So it's a great form of communication in the way of, hey, I want to make sure that you have the capacity, you are able to hold the space for me. So that way it's not, like you said, awkward at the end where it's like, well, I didn't really know and or expect for this to happen, which can be triggering for someone with attachment needs. And then it's like, I should have never said anything. And it's like, no, like that's not what we're doing here. We just have to be mindful of how we, kind of navigate ourselves into those types of conversations.
100%. So what does a healthy, secure relationship feel like, especially for someone who's never experienced one?
It typically feels very comfortable and natural, not feeling on edge, not questioning or overanalyzing everything. It can be weird for someone to experience a healthy, secure relationship since it's so incredibly opposite from maybe what they've normalized for themselves. Mostly it feels safe, you know, which again, if early on in your life, you never learn to form a sense of trust and safety, being in a secure relationship later on is going to feel very foreign, but over time it will become more and more natural to let yourself settle into the relationship. It's just learning how to lean in, learning how to embrace. It's scary and it's okay to feel that way, but again, how are we thinking? Therefore, how is that affecting the action of wanting to move forward with change?
Again, change is scary. No one really, I mean, there's certain people, we were talking about this the other day, and my boss goes, well, I love change. I'm all for change. I'm change here. And I'm like, okay, that's a lot of change at once. Some people don't like that. But I think change is inevitable. So like you have to figure out what's the best way for you to be receptive to that or experience that change.
Absolutely. Yes.
So as a therapist, how do you support your clients who are actively trying to shift their attachment style but feel like they're stuck in like old patterns?
It's interesting that we literally just came off of the conversation of change is scary. So I normalize that change takes time and to be patient and that it's scary. So not only to be patient with the process, but to be patient with oneself as they are doing something incredibly difficult, right? So I sometimes will get the question of, well, how long is this going to take?
Yep.
And I'm like, well, okay, it's okay to ask that question because I think that, some people who are anxious like that want to be able to feel the change, see the change, experience it, get the ball rolling. And so then I kind of follow up with, well, why is it so important for you to rush through this process? Like what is it that you are looking to accomplish by just moving at the speed of light, right? And so self-exploration, right, on top of change to go hand in hand, self-exploration can be uncomfortable, as people don't always love the idea of learning things about themselves that they may not like. However, we want to take our time, be mindful, and allow ourselves the space to work through healing attachment styles without this need to feel rushed, right?
Yeah.
Because like that's not only going to be a triggering experience, but we want to learn the value of taking our time. Again, people are very uncomfortable when it comes to learning things about themselves. And so then when they hear something, they learn something, like, all right, got it, good, great. Like, let's keep going, right? But we have to be careful to not intellectualize, right? Which is what a lot of people do. It's like, well, I know where this comes from. That's great. Did you feel anything from that? Did you let your body be present with it? Did you allow yourself the space to move at a pace in which you can really evaluate what's going on and where in your body that, is kind of coming up for you? And so with mindfulness, that's also a big skill to learn in conjunction with healing attachment styles. It comes up a lot with individuals who possess more avoidance styles, as one could understand that the process of healing attachment comes with a ton of vulnerability, something that they're not used to and could perceive as threatening or harmful, right? So it's like, oh, this feels weird. I don't like the way that this feels. Let's just go back to the way that things were. And it's like, no, that's okay that it feels weird, but let's try to really sit with that. So along with self-exploration, change, vulnerability is one of those things that comes back into play that, we have to learn how to do it ourselves, which is why I always heavily encourage just like, let's sit with it before we can go to another person and be like, hey, I want to do this with you.
Absolutely. So speaking of vulnerability, if you are able to kind of share with us what you've learned about your own attachment style and how do you feel like that has shaped you and how you show up in your personal life and professional life?
So it's funny because, I learned about attachment styles, of course, all throughout undergrad, graduate school, and each and every time I would learn about it, I would not be shocked to see what it was. At first, I very blindly and ignorantly was like, yeah, no, I got a secure attachment. I'm great. I'm good. Like there's nothing wrong, quote unquote, And then when I really got into the meat of it, I'm like, okay. Like I do see how like I show up like that in my relationships. I do see how I show up like that in my friendships. I too needed to learn the value of self-compassion before I can even provide that to my clients and can provide that to anybody else, right? So it's like practice what you preach. It's like, yeah, of course, like I want to be able to do that for me, because how on earth is a client going to take what I'm saying genuinely if I'm not capable of being able to promote what it is that's going on, you know, and how to be able to help yourself and how to be able to move forward in those ways. So from a personal standpoint, in my own past relationships, I've come to learn and understand a lot of what I normalized that I no longer wanted to bring into my current relationship. I still actively at times have to catch myself if I engage in those past normalized behaviors that once were present when I didn't feel safe, right? So like that's my go-to is if I get triggered or if I start to engage in a tendency from my past, it's like, okay, well, what about the situation made me not feel safe, right? So a lot of what I try to be accountable for is grounding myself, reframing my thinking, using coping skills as needed. And most importantly, if I do feel like communication would be valuable at that time, because it's like, hey, if I'm in a place where I feel like I do want to lean on someone for support, emphasis on support, not to fix, not to solve, not to take care of, but just to be heard and seen, right? Like I want to be able to lean into that so that way I don't normalize past patterns and then therefore keep myself distanced from all of what I'm trying to accomplish.
I feel like that makes total sense, because so much of what people are trying to accomplish is like them getting to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And
constantly.
It's like, where are you trying to go?
Yeah.
Where are you going?
we got nothing but time, you know?
Exactly.
Seriously.
Sam, you have shared so much on today's episode, and truly thank you so much for coming on today's episode. So I want you to talk directly to the listener, and if you could tell them one thing, or you wish that they knew one thing about attachment theory, what would that be?
Everyone has attachment needs. Emphasis on the need, right? Let's try to normalize the narrative of attachment need and not attachment issue. Everyone has them. It is not exclusively for those who have challenges with their attachment, but for all humans, right? I want people to remember that attachment is the cornerstone to connection. And we as humans naturally crave closeness and safety, something we are all deserving of, right? So not to be biased, but attachment theory is fascinating. And I really encourage people to allow themselves the opportunity to lean in, learn about themselves, try to not, you know, be so harsh or judgmental, right? We already live in a crazy, harsh, judgmental world. Why are we doing that to ourselves? Yeah. Especially in a setting where you're just trying to improve and trying to work on yourself, right? So I really, you know, want to encourage that for everybody, is that you're never going to come into therapy and experience that judgment of, oh my God, I can't believe you want to heal your attachment. That's crazy. It's like, no, you've come to the right place, and we're so happy that you're ready to start that journey.
Absolutely. And you're in a safe space where you're able to explore that.
Absolutely.
So for those who are listening, attachment styles are more than just labels. They're roadmaps that help us understand where we've been and how we show up with others. But most importantly, they're not our final destination. We can learn, heal, and grow towards secure connections. Thank you so much for tuning in to More Than a Therapy Couch. If this episode helped you reflect on your own patterns, be sure to share it with someone you trust. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and stay connected with us. Until next time, and remember, you're allowed to grow, you're allowed to change, and you're never alone in figuring it out. Thank you, Sam, so much for coming on today's episode.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.